What's up, y'all? Welcome. I'm Guy. That's John. 49ers had their local pro day on Wednesday, Middlekoff.
Those are always fun.
They've never drafted a player from their local pro day. But this group
Tom Brady knows.
Yeah, Tom Brady. Aaron Rodgers knows. I don't know if Aaron attended the local pro day.
I think he did.
You think he did? Worked out?
Because it's twofold, right? Whether you grew up in the area or you went to college at one of the neighboring colleges.
That's right.
Correct?
That's right. So Haener, Jake
Cal
Haener
would count.
checked both boxes, right?
Yeah.
I think it's more so it tends to be guys that are from
Fresno State would be in the radius.
Good question. I don't know. Is there an official? Is this like MLB blackout rules?
Yeah, I think there is like a mile.
A mile?
Well, like a mile number.
Oh, mile number. Yeah. 62 cents per mile. Travel.
Yeah, because I remember like my last year in Philadelphia, Justin Pugh, who was an offensive lineman who played for the Cardinals for a little bit, went to Syracuse, but he grew up in PA. Like McGlinchey, goes to Notre Dame, but he's a PA guy. Eagles can work out McGlinchey when he's coming out. So it's. But if you were from Syracuse, went to Syracuse, now you live in it doesn't count.
What if? Well, I guess now. What about before? I'm not being funny. You grew up and played football in Vegas, but before the Raiders were like what? I'm just saying, like, what if you grew up? You're starting to smile. I'm not even making a joke. What if you grew up in an area where there was not an NFL team in your vicinity? Were you not allowed to? Although I'm struggling to think of an area that.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's some obviously. I mean, you grow up in certain cities. There's no NFL team around. You
just don't get a local.
Not every kid goes to a local pro day.
Yeah, you can't drive. You can't hop in the car and hit a bunch of local pro days.
Well, like the guys that grow up in the South. I mean, there are probably some places where this guy's a first round pick. He's not working out anywhere.
I guess they could go to local college pro day, right? Sometimes
they have their
guys
own.
Who didn't go to their school show up at their pro day. Does that ever happen?
Like Bryce Young's not going to the Rams pro day, right?
But I mean, like at Alabama's pro day, could they have a junior college player from Mobile at that pro day?
They can, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Nick would have to okay it, but
Yeah. Nick would be like, "Yeah, got another year eligibility. Can he play?" All right, John. So here's a question we got on our mailbag, Apple Podcast. You can also, by the way, send us promo code ham at gmail.com. That email is up and running. So here's the question we got. Isn't Jake Haener just a Taylor Heineke with a slightly stronger arm? Athletic, can move in the pocket, a quote-unquote gunslinger, willing to take risks. Interesting comp. I mean, I think I saw Jake, our boy Jake, got some Brock Purdy comp questions, and I thought his answer was good, which was basically he's his own guy, I'm my own guy. We're not the same guy. But, it's just natural this year. I think a lot of guys are going to get that Brock Purdy comp question. And I think the likelihood of Jake being drafted in the 7th round is much, much lower. But what do you think? What do you think of the Heineke comp? Have you heard any comps out there for Jake?
People act like Taylor Heineke's some scrub. He's a 30-year-old that just signed a 2-year contract in Atlanta. I mean, this guy's you're going to look up and Taylor Heineke has a 10-year career. I think there's a line of delineation. There's like 15 guys that just stay starters for a large percentage of their career, right? Obviously, the top 6, 7 guys are, long-time Pro Bowlers. But then there's the Cousins, the Carrs, the Daks, the Jimmy Garoppolo's that you look up. It's like he's been a starter for 9, 10, 11 years. And then there's the group that I think the Heinekes of the world that start, back up, but play for Foles, play for a long, long time. So there's ideally Jake Haener, whoever, Brock Purdy, when those guys have aspirations of being starting quarterbacks. But if I would have told them when they were 12, 13, 14, 10 years old, you're going to be in the NFL as a player, as a quarterback for 12 plus years, like that's a positive thing. I mean, Taylor Heineke just signed a $14 million contract with almost 7 guaranteed at 30 years old. I mean, I would say Taylor Heineke's got another 3-4 years in him, right? I mean,
No, John, I think that's low.
Like, are we going to look up and a 35-year-old Taylor Heineke's going to be around?
Yes. Hell yes. Unless he gets hurt.
When the dust settles, is Taylor Heineke a raging NFL success?
Absolutely. But he was also undrafted, right? Like you get drafted, if you're Jake, you get drafted in the 3rd round, that's $900,000.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's a big deal of what round you're drafted in for money-wise. But my point is, like, playing in the league for a long time. Like eventually, if I'm a third-round pick, the $900,000 is cool. But if in a couple years everyone thinks I stink, I'll be out of the league.
Right.
So it's like I think the goal is to figure out, and Taylor, we figured out, probably he's not a really good starting quarterback, but he's definitely a guy that can start for you, probably a really good backup as he got $7 million. That there's a lot of unknown with the Jake Haener, that umbrella of player, right? The guy that's going to get drafted probably 3rd to 5th round. I would say, I mean, there is an exact percentage. Let's just pick 15% of those guys go on to become starters. Another 30, 40% become to be backups. And then the other 30% wash out of the league, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you could redraft 2015, Taylor Heineke would not go undrafted, right?
You'd go in like the 3rd or 4th round.
Right. So it's a tough comp. On one hand, you're like, well, if I can get that guy undrafted, why would I draft him in the 3rd? But the reality is you normally don't get Taylor Heineke undrafted, just like you don't get Brock Purdy at the end of the 7th round, right?
Yeah.
And to me, where Jake is different than those guys is Jake, I think, is entering the NFL draft definitely compared to Heineke. Like Jake was a 3-star recruit who went to Washington to start his career, right? Heineke went to Old Dominion and went undrafted and was not really in like the national college football consciousness. Jake's got a bunch of games against higher level opponents. Somebody I saw, maybe it was Cam Inman the other day, put up his numbers against, in like 6 Pac-12 games, how good he was at Fresno State, played for Tedford, played for DeBoer, played with NFL-ish guys around him, right? Like playing he's coming in with a much higher profile than Taylor Heineke did to the NFL draft.
Played against Oregon, played against UCLA, got hurt against USC, but has played in Bright.
Played against Oregon State, which is a good defense.
Yeah.
Played in that game. Yeah.
He was awesome. That was the walk-off touchdown game, right?
Oregon State, yeah.
But he had thrown a touchdown late in that game before they got the ball back to drive the field at like 11:30 at night. The other thing is he's played Boise a bunch of times, who just gets respect whether they're not the same Boise you and I grew up on. There is a level of where you're coming from, right? Like if Taylor Heineke had done the equivalent of what he did at Fresno State, he probably ends up going in the 5th, 6th round. Like Old Dominion is not, even for non-power D1 AA schools, I would say, not viewed upon as some football power.
Right.
Like Jake does have played for Chris Peterson and Jeff Tedford. I think his 2 coaches have a lot of
and
juice.
Kalen DeBoer.
And Kalen DeBoer. Like I think he's got a lot of juice with the coach situation, don't you?
Yeah. Garrett Grayson was a 3rd round pick out of Colorado State the year that Taylor Heineke went undrafted. And, I don't know if he played an NFL snap. Maybe he did, but Taylor Heineke was a much better pick. I mean, it just shows you like the range, right? After the top, what would you say, 15 picks of the draft in terms of quarterbacks, like the range is just really wide. Do you think the Niners would like Jake? And I know Jake talked to John Lynch and Brian Greasy at the Pro Day Wednesday. And B, is there a world in which the Niners draft a quarterback in this draft?
I would say on the latter, no. Because their quarterback room is kind of unique. It's a bunch of young guys. So you bring in a 4th quarterback. You don't want to draft a guy that most likely you're going to have to cut, right?
Well, unless you're going to trade Trey Lance.
If you told me they traded Trey Lance during the draft, yeah, they could take Jake Haener with one of the 3rd round picks. So it's not.
But it probably doesn't make sense for them. You're saying, do you think? Because I think the feeling kind of is you would have to use one of your better picks to take him, right? You're not getting him with your 6th round pick. You're not getting him with certainly you're not getting him with your 7th round picks.
Well, you wouldn't draft a quarterback if you're not trading Trey Lance during the draft, right?
Yeah. I mean, part of it is you'd have to end up. Part of the premise there, if you got Jake in the 7th round, you would just take him, be like, oh, this is incredible value.
Yeah.
Whatever. But you'd have to end up cutting a quarterback you took in the 4th round or something, potentially, or cutting Darnold, or right. Unless you thought Brock wasn't going to recover. I do think they would like him, though. I saw somebody in our chat said Jake Haener scored higher on the higher percentile on the S2 cognitive test. I love that everyone's like, the Wonderlic sucks. We got to stop leaking these test scores. And then it's, we just got better tests now. We're going to leak all these other test scores.
Every player's like, Anthony Richardson knocked it out of the park. Will Levis, also awesome. It's like, okay, guys, I mean.
But I buy that. I do. I think when you watch Jake, fast processor, right? Like
Yeah.
really sees it, like really fucking sees it. And I think his arm, if you watch it, strong enough to throw wide side of the field, can throw deep. Um, so
Yeah, he's not
I
gonna get
would buy
he's
that
not
his
gonna get
estimate is
drafted by the
good.
49ers, but I think my guess he gets a 4th round pick. He gets drafted in the 4th round.
You think like what kind of what's the profile of team that you think would draft him?
Well, I do think a lot of the 49er offense teams, like Cleveland Browns, Stefanski, be Deshaun's backup. They need a cheap backup. The Minnesota Vikings, Sean O'Connell, or not Sean O'Connell,
Kevin.
Kevin O'Connell. Again, I mean, he could be drafted by any fucking team. I mean, he's a quarterback. He's on every team's draft board as draftable, I would guess.
Yeah.
So the only thing is the size. Maybe there are some teams that have non-starters with size. I don't think you're the 49ers. You can draft back-to-back, sub 6 foot guys.
6'1" listed, I think.
Yeah, 6 feet.
Mohammed says DTR is who I hope they target in the 5th round. Yeah, I saw he was on a list the other day. I mean, we talked about him the other day, but he's making his way around some lists. Interesting. Here's another question, John, from Sport Guy 0341. He says, favorite podcast, question for the mailbag. It's coming up to that time of year when sports podcasting content gets a little lean, and I find myself turning to regular radio broadcasts for something to listen to at work. But they can be kind of a pain to listen to because they can be very hot takey. They're basically forced to talk themselves into circles just to fill a 3-hour time slot. And sometimes the teases before the break make me cringe so bad I feel like I'm getting a migraine. You guys have come for radio and now the podcast world. Are there any radio programs, new or old, that you wish were in the podcast game instead?
I would say every radio show now is also podcasted, right?
That's yeah, that's true.
I don't listen to any radio.
Podcast game.
Yeah. I just don't listen to any radio. And haven't, besides Sirius XM, like does that count, I guess? I do actually listen to Sirius XM if I'm in the car.
I think our brains have changed, Like you and I have talked about this over the years when we were doing radio. Like before there was ever an alternative, I was more than happy to just pass the time listening to whatever. I think the golden age of radio was not when we were doing sports talk radio, but it was before that when people were allowed to do, if you're in the Bay Area, you might remember, you definitely would remember, like Gary Radnich's show, right? Where it was kind of a podcast that had commercials in it, right? It wasn't, here's this hard 15 minutes. And then in 15 more minutes, we're talking about this. And then the top of the next hour, we're going to go back to the topic that we really hammered the first time. It was much less formulaic. And I think that was an enjoyable listen.
Yeah, and I think Northern California, and I remember at the Super Bowl, talked to a dude that runs the LA radio station. I think they were crushing it. Now they have the Dodgers, and business is booming for them. But one thing he mentioned was the downloads and the streaming was big for them. Probably a little different. I do think, I remember talking to Larry Krueger about this when he left KMBR last year, and Damon would fall into the same thing. Like the Bay Area. For example, I was listening to a business podcast, and this guy was talking about, he goes back between New York and San Francisco, and just the difference in, like, New York's just rocking and rolling, I mean, people are coming back, like, in the office. I mean, it's a different mentality. There's the culture on the East Coast is different. Like, you just go to Philly, it ain't empty anymore. Yet San Francisco it's not even close. In terms of commercial real estate, the emptiness of the area. Well, what does that mean? Less people are commuting. And radio is very determined by the commute. Well, the Bay Area is unlike any big city right now in the country. And honestly, there is a wide gap. But like radio is not just fucked from it was trending the wrong way before the last couple of years. But specifically, if you're in radio in San Francisco, you are at an enormous disadvantage. I would tell any advertiser, you're fucking insane to give them a penny. Who are you playing to? Like, it's done. And the other thing, and I've always said this, and I'm a big believer in this, is it's 2023 now. So we have easily over a decade of cars that immediately connect to the phone. In 5 more years, we'll have 15 years of cars. So even if you can't afford, anyone knows if you look at price of fucking cars, I mean, a Suburban is $150,000. So obviously new cars are very expensive. But as people buy used cars, and that market is You see the repo business is booming right now.
Yeah.
So there'll be a turnover, and it's fucking markets go up and they go down. The amount of people that don't have, like right now, my Tahoe does not connect. My girlfriend gets in there and she's like, "What the fuck is this?" She can't even comprehend it. I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, I'm a Sirius loyalist. I always try to hype up Sirius, and I do. I like it. But my point is, like, we're so close to having multiple decades where everyone will have a car, basically, or the overwhelming majority of connect to this thing, which already is our life. So
Right.
they're fucked. I mean, they don't have a shot. I think they just, I don't think it's possible. But that's where New York, Philly, like their radio markets are still booming. People are going back to work. People listen more to it. The Bay has always been a little more transient, right? People coming from all over the place, and not as many people that just born and raised there. Like, more likely if you go to Philly and you just go downtown and you meet a guy, he's going to be from Philly.
Right.
If you go to your neighbor's house right now or go to eat somewhere, there's a decent chance, like, this guy's from New York, this guy's from Texas.
They're not
like
from San Francisco, especially San Francisco specifically.
I'd argue it's a West. Like, I see it in Arizona. I can't tell you how many people I meet. People are not from here.
Well, it's why I think the West Coast is worse from a college sports standpoint. I think you tend to get more. I mean, obviously, you get a lot of Californians go to California schools, et cetera. But I think LA. Think about it. LA and the Bay Area are not. They are pro sports towns. They are not college sports towns, right?
But I would say LA is a good example. Different from Stanford and Cal, though. I think Cal has, football wise, definitely
Cal has
fan base than
upside.
Stanford.
Yeah.
Even though it feels like they're trending the wrong way. But
I just mean from a fan base, they have upside. Like their fans, if you told me Cal was ranked 10th in the nation, like they would fill their stadium.
100%.
Or 20th. I mean, it doesn't.
USC and UCLA is a good example of two powerhouse schools. Like, if you go to one of those schools, historically, I mean, who knows? I think college education is trending the wrong way, but that's another conversation. A lot of those people stay living in that area, right? So, like, because you said that LA is a pro sports town. I would say UCLA and USC meet a lot in that area.
UCLA basketball, yes. USC football are the biggest, right?
But I just mean, if you just meet someone, even if they don't go to games, like, they kind of keep tabs.
Yeah, I'd be curious. You have a large, Stanford especially suffers. They have a large international student population, right? These are people that they leave the country after school's over. 100%. And they don't come in with they're not coming for the football. That's the other thing, right? You go to USC, you might go like, I just want to be a big time football school, right? You don't go to Stanford. Nobody goes to Stanford for that. Like, oh man, I just dreamed of going to Stanford football games my whole childhood.
You couldn't get in.
You couldn't get in, but you know what I'm saying? Like, we know that football winning gets more. We know this. Your football program wins, more people apply to your school because they just want to come to that place and enjoy that environment, right?
Well,
and SC, you're right. I'm agreeing with you. SC has that, right?
Yeah, I mean, they've done studies on the NCAA tournament and its impact, like on Cinderella schools, and definitely the studies on the SEC with football and Alabama's growth, because people used to rip like West Coast elites, coastal elites in general, would be like, oh, that the SEC, beside Vanderbilt, fucking schools suck. Well, 20, 30 years ago, it was very easy to get in. Well, now, because the amount of people, the admissions, the amount of people, what's it called?
The amount of their applications.
Their applications is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah,
gone through the roof. So what does that supply demand? It drives the admission process higher and higher. So the level of student getting in there is dramatically better.
Right.
And I mean, we've seen it firsthand. How much more popular is the SEC for two guys that have never lived in the South? It's just much more powerful television product now for a decade plus.
I remember looking up a few years ago, as Saban was getting these raises, and it's because he's really he makes money for the university because more people A, donate, but B, apply to come to school there, and tuition goes up and all that. It's what Pat Hill always had the famous quote, like, athletics is the front porch to your school. Right. And you turn the light on and that's what people see first and it gets people in the door.
One thing is like some family friends in like the Sacramento area. And I know my cousin's family friends in like the Fresno area whose kids now are like 16, 17. Do you know where they're applying to go to school?
Oregon. Michigan, Alabama.
No, those days are done. They're going Tennessee. I know people.
Yeah.
I have a family friend whose kids go to Tennessee and Ole Miss. Another one who's balancing between Tennessee and Florida. These are kids that not in a million years, 20 years ago when you and I were in high school, it wouldn't even have crossed anyone's mind.
I remember
didn't
we
know
knew
one
like a
person.
person that went to Colorado back when they were in the Big 12. We're like, oh, okay, that's a long way to go.
Because it's twofold. One, you can't get into any of these California schools, and two, you're like, would I rather go to Tennessee or Fresno State or Cal Poly? I'd go to Tennessee too.
Yeah. Oregon had a boom when their football program burst onto the scene in the early 2000s, right? Everybody.
That was
trying
like
to go
the
to
SEC for us. I remember.
Now it's impossible to get. It's hard to get into Oregon.
It is.
I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because so many California kids go there.
Makes sense.
Next up, Pete says, if I ran a network and was looking for a correspondent on baldness, I'd hire Middlekoff. He speaks like an expert on the subject. He is an expert on the subject.
I love when people like make fun. I don't know if he necessarily was like, yeah, I'm bald.
He's not making fun.
No, I just think there's.
You're saying, how dare you assume that I'm ashamed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got in this altercation, be strong, a verbal sparring match a couple months ago. Long story, Jim, with a guy. Honestly, for a split second, I'm like, is this fight going to go down? One of his comments was like, nice hairline, bro. I'm like, got me there, man. I swear to God, I was like, yeah, man, I've been bald for 12 years, bro. Nailed me.
Wait, was this about wiping down a bench again?
No, it started. Yeah, it's hard to explain, but it escalated and it escalated quick. I fired back. He made a comment and then I fired back. And
did it start with a comment about physical appearance?
No, it started with he said something because we'd kind of been eyeballing each other for I'd say a month. Been a little weird. One of those guys that listens to the music out loud and yeah, it's just.
Had you said something about the music?
Never had, no. But I guess he didn't like the way that I stormed around. We just bad vibes. Some people just don't vibe.
Sure, 100%.
And he did one of those. How old are you? How old are you? Because I did. What's up? I was like, how old am I? I didn't. It kind of caught me off guard, and I'm like,
is he older?
I said 37 or whatever, and he's like, grow up. And it was one of those.
That's a two-part setup.
Yeah, it was one of the. It was like.
How old is he? Older?
He said 28, and it was a low moment for my life to even. It was embarrassing.
All right, we won't make you relive it. I do want to. This does give us an opportunity to address something else, though, which is people have not stopped tagging us in Trey Lance photos, sending DMs. How old were you when you shaved your head? Mid to late 20s?
Where I can't relate to Trey, I didn't recede. I bald from the back forward.
Yeah.
So when you bald from the back forward, unless it's coming from an aerial view, you're more hidden. When you recede like that, there's just no hiding it, guy. And I think as someone DM'd me today that Trey Lance, they cut out the other guy. So it must have been a separate picture.
Yeah.
And it was like Trey Lance looks like he's the guy playing Patrick Mahomes in the biopic or something. And it was just like, oh my God. It's just, it is. Because you see Patrick, who has a similar kind of curl thing going, just has a full head of hair.
Right.
So it's, and the other kid that he stood next to, clearly full head of hair.
Moore, yeah.
So it's
well, then he wore a beanie and another thing at TCU, and people started sending it to me, probably you too. Like, oh, look, now he's put the beanie on. I, as someone with hair, you as someone who's been through it, I watched you go through it, John. I was there on the front lines with you, kind of. And as you cocktailed Rogaine and what was the other one? Propecia. I'm very sensitive. And you are at a certain age for people, especially famous people who probably hear it nonstop. Trey's got his mention. So here's what I would say. If you want to submit yourself for Shave It or Save It, you are more than welcome to. But we're not going to, you want to cover your face up and whatever. At this point in the game, we are not giving Trey Lance that treatment.
I give you in your early to mid 20s, I give you a little leeway, but I think we have to acknowledge it's a bad look. Like it's it's just a bad look. So I'm not telling the guy he should bick his head, but whatever he's got going probably isn't working. Yeah.
You can email us if you want to submit your head, though. Promo code ham@gmail.com. Next up, John, from Mike, 5-star mailbag. Thanks for the content. Guys always said he wants the money on the leaderboard at the end of a golf tournament. That way we know what guys are battling for when they're putting for third or fourth, etc. I was thinking about it watching the Masters. I was also thinking, what technological advance in sports watching could we not do without now? For example, there's no way we could watch golf without the TrackMan trail on the golf ball when it gets hit. First and 10 line could not do without the first and 10 line.
No.
The clock, like people back in the day before us used to watch games without even the score on the screen.
Clock matters. Yeah, clock matters.
Have you seen any of the MLB umpire cam?
No.
Umpires wearing cameras on their. It looks really good. It's pretty cool. Here comes the pitch. It's from the umpire's headset.
Everyone doing it, or just like national broadcast?
I don't think it's on local shows. I saw it in like an Apple Plus game on Fox. I think I saw it. So I don't think it's on every
Katie
game.
Nolan still doing those, or she get the heave up?
No, not on Apple Plus anymore. Not on Apple Plus.
That was one of those that I felt like on the internet didn't enjoy her, and she didn't have. I saw Jim Nance snap back at everyone talking shit about Tony Romo. So if you're gonna be polarizing, you gotta have a Nance on your side. This BS.
What did Nance say?
He said, I read some of his quotes today. One was, what's funny is he listed off 2 games. It was like the Thanksgiving game and one other game they did. It was like the highest rated regular season games of the year. And he's like, no one said anything then. And he was doing the same thing then when we had 50 million people watching as he did in the playoffs when our audience was also big. He just thought it was unfair. And I was thinking like, well, Jim, one of the stories was at CBS. Like that's how the story kind of it was. People are going to make fun of you, or whatever. On the internet. It was that CBS had a quote unquote intervention. Like that's kind of, I would say, where the story really took off like a rocket. Right? It was like, oh, people think Tony Romo's losing his fastball or whatever, and then it was like CBS had to talk to him, and that didn't just come out. Like that clearly wasn't made up, and even CBS, whoever that was, like, it wasn't an intervention, so clearly,
there was a conversation.
Like, Jim, you were with Faldo for 10 years, and he was awful. So it's like, you're really good, Do I think and I think it's probably cool having Tony young.
Got to have his guys back, too, in that spot.
Yeah.
Right? He has to defend Tony in that spot. Has to.
You could argue that Tony set himself up with calling the plays. It was never going to be a sustainable thing. Yeah. That's really, was his, but it'd be like having a pitch no one's ever seen before, and then the pitch is disappearing. It's like, well, what happened to that pitch? You're like, can't throw it anymore.
Yeah. And it might have been just purely based on the knowledge he already had in his brain from just having played in the NFL.
You could argue non-Kyler, but just a top quarterback in the NFL who just the last 5 years, like a Mahomes, who just studies every week, plans. If you just got him at a game, he would just have some incredible insight of this is what we usually install. When you see this, look for this. It's just, that's their vernacular.
Well, the level of prep that you do as a player or a coach is just, even if you watch a lot of tape as an analyst, it can't be anywhere near the level that you do when it's your ass. You could get KO'd if you don't know the play, right? Or benched, or you're going to lose, you get retired, whatever. It's a whole different level of pressure when you're in the room and the quarterback coach says, "What do you do here?" And you're like, I don't know. You can't
think about that all day, every day for 6 months, for however long you're in the league.
Yeah. You're
sitting next to that quarterback coach and that coordinator just talking that.
Right. You don't get to go what would you do here, Jim? Technological advance that you couldn't do without, John? Sports TV?
I think 3 and out one's pretty good. Or the first down marker.
First down marker, yeah.
Yeah.
How about the kick would have been good from this distance? That one I don't quite.
One thing I could do without is the win probability.
Win probability, yeah. I could do without that one.
I'm not a huge win probability after the fact. I don't care.
Oh, in the third quarter, they had a win probability of 98%. Oh, well, I didn't turn the game off. Why? I was waiting for the
Like
2%.
everyone was going to live in the plane, like every plane, until the engine broke and they all crashed and died.
Tell me the survival probability of each seat on an airplane. That I'd be interested in. Yeah.
Yeah.
13F. Fine. Finally, John, mailbag question from A. Galvin. Did you see the JT O'Sullivan video about Kyle? Pretty harsh, but made some good points. Made some good points that you have touched on previously. Go Mustangs. I assume that's a Cal Poly shout out to you. Go Mustangs.
Stangs, baby.
So a bunch of people sent us this JT O'Sullivan video. And I did watch it. And what he did was he went through at first I'm like, I watched it late. Like I just watched it yesterday or 2 days ago.
I saw it when it went viral, whatever,
You did.
last week.
And it was like him talking to himself dressed as Kyle. And the first time I clicked on it, I was like, I don't know what this is. I just didn't watch it.
That's what I did.
Okay. So I don't know, something I saw.
Is he pretending to be Kyle Shanahan? Was that the point of the video?
No, that's what I thought. Yes, but like it's not a part of the video, really. The meat of the video is him going through the Trey Lance injury, Jimmy's injury, Brock's injury, and Josh Johnson's injury. And I actually thought it was I didn't realize at first I thought it was dumb. In hindsight, it's actually kind of genius because he says basically he's kind of offended when Kyle in his outgoing press conference in the season acted like it was common sense. Sometimes quarterbacks get hurt, no biggie.
Agreement here.
Yeah, so we agree on that, right? So it's actually so then he goes through each injury and goes, these guys didn't get hurt for common sense reasons. Here's the reasons they got hurt. And I did have one overarching take. So I'll give you, for those of you, John, you didn't watch it, the Trey Lance injury, he says.
Well, I watched the injuries.
Yeah, you watched the injuries. But he goes through the video and he's like, it's poorly blocked. McGlinchey gets beat. Banks, because of that, gets knocked off his spot. He's like, Trent Williams then gets knocked off his spot and doesn't recover, doesn't really know who to block. And then Trey gets hurt because the whole thing is kind of blown up from a blocking standpoint. Jimmy's injury.
Wasn't Trent pulling on that play?
Trent was pulling. He gets kind of knocked off his spot because McGlinchey gets beat, which knocked Banks. And so Trent gets knocked. And then Trent kind of wanders through the hole and doesn't block anybody and misses Cody Barton, who then drills Trey. The Jimmy injury is he's got five guys to block six. And his point on the Jimmy injury was he's got Jimmy in the shotgun, McCaffrey to his right, Debo to his left. He goes, based on the pressure, both guys, instead of running whatever route they were supposed to run, should have come out and gone into the flat hot on each. He's like, if you watch McCaffrey does the right thing. McCaffrey comes out and just goes in the flat hot. But Jimmy's looking left. And he's like, well, you got a wide receiver running this running back route, Debo, who doesn't know what to do. Debo doesn't run hot left. Jimmy's looking, nothing, bang, gets beat. He's like, that's on you. That's on the play.
On the player.
He's like, it's on the player, but it's on you for not coaching. Like, you've got Debo in this situation. That's not his natural situation, right? And then the Brock injury, hey, our stance, I think, has been.
Didn't McGlinchey get smoked on that Jimmy one too?
Also gets smoked on that one, yes.
Like part of, and this is where the coach would be like, my player, if your right tackle, and I would say this is a general theme, back-to-back injuries of Trey, is getting smoked, there's not much you can do. Now, I think Belichick would probably counter of like, well, that's where the details of every fucking guy on every single play. If you're going to have Debo in a place, which he's been a lot, that's where I'd be like, well, Debo lines up in the backfield a lot. So you're going over. It's not like Debo never hears the word, hey, if we get pressure here, how does he see? Because if Debo's on the left side, he doesn't see 69 getting, spun like a dreidel over there. Right. I know that it ends up Phillips or whoever gets Jimmy comes from the other side, but Jimmy has to freak out because McGlinchey, right?
There's one guy unblocked, and it comes off the left edge.
Yes, Phillips.
But then he gets flushed, and McGlinchey's guy also, yeah. And then the other one was the Tyler Croft block, as he wrote, long ass time for a backup tight end to hold up on the edge. We have long established that. I know that play gets called. Our take on this play, I'm not going to rehash it here. We think that's a design flaw in the play. Like, there was a problem with the play. Like, there is some blame for calling that play in that situation with that protection. So here was my overall takeaway from it. Not so much the individual play Kyle stuff. But I did wonder after watching it, my first thought, John, was just, when you've got two quarterbacks that play two different styles, and so you have different plays for different players, and you spend an off season after playing with Jimmy, preparing for Trey, and you prepare for Trey, and then Trey gets hurt, and you go back to Jimmy, and then you go to Brock. Are you putting your team at a disadvantage? Are you putting Trent Williams and Aaron Banks and McGlinchey and Debo and all? Are you putting them at a disadvantage when they're not spending 100% of their time preparing for the same offense, right? If the answer to your question is, what exactly do you do on offense? If the answer is, well, it depends which quarterback you have, then you are just opening yourself up to the possibility that your guys aren't getting every possible rep doing the same thing, which is where the Ravens kind of got it. The Ravens are clear, right? Like, hey, we do one thing and we're going to get it. Make sure every guy, if our quarterback gets hurt, which he has before, the guy behind him is going to be able to at least, it's not going to be any different for the right guard when we go to the backup quarterback. Right. And I do wonder if that's just kind of that is part of what Kyle Shanahan's team has to overcome a little bit. Right.
They went all in on the Trey offense, didn't they?
Went all in on the Trey offense. And then they played it. But, the Trey offense was not the offense they'd run the year before. Right. So it goes to reason if Trey played 17 weeks, week 8, that offense could be better than it was week 2 because these guys are, running different plays than they run the year prior.
Yeah. But they ran the same offense with the other two guys, right? They just went back to their normal offense.
Yeah, they ran the same offense with the other two guys. Yeah. I'm not it's not even a blame assignment takeaway that I had so much as just like, yeah, I mean, if you run things differently and you have to change it on the fly, it opens yourself up to little cracks. All 3 injuries happened on plays where, and JT's point, I agree with him. Like, if you're going to, running Trey was part of the deal, right? Part of why you drafted him. So whatever, that's the one I have the least amount of problem with. So that's just part of it. Sometimes shit happens, but all 3 guys got hurt on plays that were, and maybe if we checked NFL history, quarterbacks always get hurt on, I don't know if you'd call them broken plays, but more often get hurt on plays where there's a missed blocking assignment or something like that, right?
Well, I mean, I think about Steve Young laying on the ground. I'm pretty sure Aeneas Williams was untouched coming off the edge and fucking killed him, right? Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of times quarterbacks historically have been killed. It's either an unblocked blitzer or a defensive lineman that just whiffs, right? And so that guy is coming unhindered of just full speed. And he weighs, even if you're a big quarterback, that guy now is at minimum got 40 to 70 pounds on you. So the weight gap, like what's Purdy weigh? 215? What's Reddick weigh? I mean, at minimum 250?
Right. Yeah, Just got
to block him.
You just got to block him. All right. Submit the mailbags, Apple Podcast. Leave us a 5-star review. Put a question in there. Or you can just email promo code ham@gmail.com. Anything else on this, John?
No.
Leonard Marshall was untouched full speed at Montana from behind.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty consistent theme in the history of devastating injuries.
And who's famously gets uninjured? Brady, who plays for one of the most detail-oriented programs in the history of the league.
Got hit one time, went down.
Yeah. But my point is just like, do you open yourself up to just shit happening when you're trying to do 2 different things? And the Niners were, as it turns out, trying to do 2 different things, right?
Yeah.
One offense for one quarterback, a different offense for another quarterback. All right. On that note. Later, y'all. Hold on. Later, y'all. Hold on. Later, y'all.